Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're moving beyond the purely experiential.
Right.
Beyond that, that feeling of coherence, and we're getting into the architectural blueprint of reality itself. If our last deep dive volume Omega was about the process of awakening, sort of the lived return to equilibrium.
Yeah, the personal journeys.
Exactly. Then volume 1, which we're starting today, is the map. It's the formal language of that very equilibrium. We are defining the universal law itself, math physics.
And that's such a critical shift. Awakening is a realization, a return to dynamic balance.
Right.
This volume provides the structure behind that feeling. We're moving from the intuitive experience to its systematic mathematical structure.
And the mission today is pretty ambitious.
It is. We're going to systematically walk through the foundations of math physics. That means, defining the philosophical need for it, dissecting the new math required, analyzing the engine that generates reality, and then exploring the huge cosmological implications.
And the whole point of this intense formalism, is really to solve the great fragmentation that we see everywhere in science today.
Absolutely.
We're dealing with models that just break down. The moment you cross scales or the moment you bring consciousness into the picture, they fall apart.
They do.
So this framework, it tries to unify physics, consciousness, and meaning into one single scale invariant system.
A theory of everything that actually applies everywhere.
From the quantum field to human psychology, all the way up to the shape of the cosmos.
And to do that, we have to formally place the observer, and by that we mean you, not just within reality, but right at the generative center of it.
Okay, so let's begin there. Let's justify this enormous undertaking. Why do we even need my physics?
The answer is in the fundamental flaw of the current systems. You could almost call it a consciousness exclusion principle.
Right. Physics today, it's all driven by this legacy of reductionist materialism. It treats consciousness as what? A secondary thing, a chemical accident.
Or a philosophical add-on, as the source puts it. And that failure it's catastrophic because it means our models are fundamentally incomplete.
How so?
Well, if reality is generated through observation, but your model treats the observer as something external,
You have a paradox.
you have an inherent, unsolvable paradox right at the starting line. So Mott physics, it forces an axiomatic shift. We have to replace the axiom of objectivity, that impossible view from nowhere, with the axiom of rendering.
Rendering. So that implies active generation, not just passive reception.
Exactly.
Reality isn't some fixed, pre-built stage. It's something that's actively generated by conscious systems.
Yes.
But tell us more about the implications of making consciousness a causal variable. What does that specifically mean for the universe?
It means that the universe must formally include the observer, or consciousness, as a physically causal variable, one that produces measurable effects.
It's not a preference, it's a requirement.
It's a physical requirement for a complete model. If you don't have it, the math can't close. And here's the detail most models just ignore. Observation is not a passive event. It's defined here as an energetic act. It has a cost.
Okay, that's a huge claim. We need to unpack that. What exactly is the cost of observation?
The cost it's manifold. It's energy allocation, cognitive load, time, even metabolic effort.
Yeah.
When you choose to observe, you are spending systemic energy.
Physically and informationally.
Both. To select, stabilize, and maintain a specific reality state from this, infinite field of potential, when you focus your attention, you're reducing entropy locally.
And that takes energy.
It requires energy input, just like the second law of thermodynamics dictates. If physics doesn't account for that energetic cost in its formal equations, it can't accurately model the transaction between what's potential and what's realized. The fact that you spent the energy to look, to listen, to focus, that is a physical input that fundamentally changes the output.
So if physics doesn't account for the energy cost of attention, it is inherently incomplete, which I guess brings us to the three big crises that current physics is struggling with.
Exactly. These crises are the architectural holes that Mount physics is trying to fill. The first one is the most famous: fragmentation across scales.
Right.
We have general relativity, which is beautiful for the macro scale, gravity, space-time, cosmic structure. Then we have quantum mechanics for the microscale atoms, particles.
And they don't talk to each other.
They're mathematically incompatible. One uses smooth manifolds, the other uses discrete probabilities. It's like they're written in different languages. And when you try to apply one to the other's domain, like gravity at the quantum level,
The math just breaks.
it breaks. A real theory of everything has to use one coherent language, one that applies everywhere, fractally, from the smallest electron orbit to the largest galaxy cluster.
And the second crisis, which really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today, is the unresolved observer problem. You call it a crisis, not just a debate. Why?
Because the stalemate stops any real progress on the foundational issue of measurement. Physics treats consciousness as external, something happening to the system, but every single quantum experiment confirms that observation changes outcomes.
But we still don't know what an observer is.
The field still lacks a formal, testable, mathematically rigorous definition. Until we define the observer as a formal operator within the equations, we're just stuck in that loop of telling scientists to shut up and calculate.
Just ignore the biggest mystery of all.
Exactly. Sweeping the mystery of how probability collapses into form right under the rug. Math physics makes the formal definition of the observer its primary architectural component.
And the third limitation, which brings all this formalism back to the human experience, is the missing variable of meaning.
Right. Current physical laws describe motion, mass, energy transfer. They tell you what happens.
But not why.
But they are completely silent on purpose, value, intention, or meaning. These laws, they can describe a rock rolling down a hill perfectly, but they can't model why a complex system, like you, chooses one trajectory over another.
A system without meaning can't model life.
Or choice, or creativity, or the evolution of mind. These core variables that govern agency, they have to be integrated. Otherwise, physics just remains this elaborate clockwork mechanism that has no direction.
So the mandate isn't just to add consciousness, it's to rebuild the entire foundation so that meaningful action is actually possible within the model itself.
Yes.
This is the mandate. Give the soul its mathematical voice.
Precisely. The goal is to unify rigor and meaning. We're translating these intuitive human-centric principles, balance, compassion, intention, into a rigorous axiomatic system.
So it's not just building equations.
No, we're building a coherent conceptual truth first, and then constructing the mathematics necessary to support it. This avoids what the material calls the math-first trap.
Where the math is beautiful, but the concepts underneath are.
Nonsensical, or just totally divorced from reality.
Right.
If the predictive power of a complex equation lets you ignore conceptual incoherence like, say, non-physical dimensions that can never be measured, then the theory just becomes dogma masquerading as science.
So mass physics reverses that priority.
It does. Conceptual coherence has to come first, grounded in the observer's reality. The ultimate goal here is to rebuild our scientific understanding so that the observer, meaning, and purpose are the generative core of reality, to restore dignity, agency, and direction to our inner experience.
Okay, let's move from the why to the how. From the necessity of the shift to the architecture itself. We need to introduce the philosophical cornerstone, this dual-engine model.
Right.
The idea that all phenomena are powered by the interplay of two complementary fundamental forces, science, S, and beauty, B.
This is the essential tension that generates the entire universe. And it's important to think of it less as science versus beauty in the everyday sense.
And more as structure versus expansion.
Exactly. Science S is the coherence operator. It's the force of structure, definition, boundaries, stability, rules, memory. It's a compression principle. It takes all that possibility and collapses it into something specific, which allows for form and history and continuity.
And what happens if S gets out of control? If it dominates?
If S becomes excessive, the system becomes rigid. It suffers from dogmatism, stasis, and it risks a sudden catastrophic collapse because it loses the ability to adapt to anything new. It's just too brittle.
Okay, so contrast that with its counterpart, beauty, B, the expansion operator.
B is the force of novelty, divergence, freedom, possibility, creativity. It expands the state space of the system. It introduces complexity and potential. B is that impulse toward the unknown, the drive for new information.
And if B becomes excessive?
Then the system just devolves into chaos, fragmentation, no definition, burnout. It loses the stability it needs to integrate any of its new experiences.
So all of reality, at every single scale, from a galaxy forming to you writing a poem, it all comes from this continuous bounded tension between structure S and expansion B. But what's really fascinating is how these macro forces show up internally, within a conscious system. They're defined by the four internal currents. Why do we need to break S and B down into these adult and child modes?
Well, this distinction gives us the precision we need to model adaptive complexity or, learning. The adult currents stabilize the long-run trajectory, and the child currents manage the immediate experience and novelty.
Okay, so let's break them down.
You have S-big science, which is the structural logic filter. This is your adult structure, discipline, stability. It's the integrity of your beliefs, the clarity of your boundaries. Then you have big beauty, which is meaning and value adult purpose.
That's your why, your long-term aim.
Exactly, your teleological aim, why you are expending energy in the first place.
These are regulated by the child currents, which are crucial for adaptation.
They are. We have little science, which is curiosity and exploration. That's what drives novelty seeking, the willingness to go beyond your own boundaries. And then little beauty, which is harmony and integration. It manages the immediate embodiment that felt resonance of new experiences.
Can you just elaborate on the consequence of suppressing one of those child currents? Like, what happens if you suppress?
Okay, so if you suppress your curiosity and exploration, you're basically denying the system new information. Your adult structure is then forced to operate using an outdated map of reality.
So it becomes brittle.
It becomes brittle and dogmatic because it can't adapt. This is exactly why suppressing a child's freedom to explore, or an employee's, leads to structural rigidity in the long run. The observer operator itself is mathematically defined as the synthesis of all four of these required voices, hat plus hat plus hat plus hat.
So they all have to be active.
The key insight is that internal harmony requires all four to be active, valued, and in constant communication. If you suppress any one current, you create this energetic inefficiency, and you force the remaining currents to overcompensate.
Okay. Now let's lay the groundwork with the foundational truths, the 5 core axioms of a consciousness-inclusive universe.
Axiom 1. Reality is relational and dynamically rendered. It emerges from the interaction field, not from isolated objects. It's a continuous flow of generated experience.
Axiom 2. 2 complementary forces drive all dynamics. S and B are the irreducible primitives. Everything else is just a derivative of their interplay.
Axiom 3. Systems tend toward dynamic equilibrium, or method. And crucially, this is stability achieved through bounded motion and oscillation, not frozen stasis.
Axiom 4. Observation is a physical act. Measurement and awareness formally integrate mind into physics, which solves the observer paradox by making the observer a causal input.
And then Axiom 5, meaning as a primary variable. This is the axiom that makes the physics teleological. Information, meaning value. These are formalized as physically causal variables. They influence rendering outcomes by weighting probability distributions.
So if something is more meaningful to the observer,
The universe spends more processing power, probabilistically speaking, to manifest that outcome.
that same concept also formally defines compassion, using the variable empathy compassion.
It does. Empathy, or kappa, is formalized as a physical coupling force. And what's fascinating is its thermodynamic function. It reduces entropy. It reduces systemic energy consumption by synchronizing the SB oscillations of interconnected systems.
When two people are in sync.
When two people or systems are in empathetic resonance, their actions become coordinated. They require less wasted energy for communication, for overcoming relational friction. Kindness in this framework is defined as thermodynamically optimal because it lowers coordination costs across the entire network.
This level of axiomatic change, it demands a mathematical revolution, which takes us to the no-negative universe condition. The claim here is profound. Classical math, specifically subtraction and negative signs, has actually obscured the relational dynamics of reality. How?
Well, the classical number line collapses a multi-axis reality onto a single dimension of magnitude. And in doing so, it introduces these non-physical constructs like anti-existence or negation. In the MAT framework, energy and influence are only ever present.
There's no true absence.
There is no true absence or cancellation. There's only presence, movement, and relationship action and counteraction. We enforce the axiom, a no-negative universe.
That is a fundamental break. If you get rid of subtraction, what do you replace it with? How do you model something like loss or an opposing force?
Subtraction gets replaced entirely with what we call relational transformations, or the introduction of a complementary current that's acting in an inverse phase.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Say you have plus 5 5s on the z-axis and you want to model its reduction. You don't use $3 on the sig exact. You model it as the introduction of a +3,3 vector along the b-axis, which acts in counter polarity to c z dollars. This is all done through polarity-vector mathematics, or PVM.
PVM uses a pure polarity space. Can you maybe give us an analogy to ground this for the listener?
Absolutely. Imagine reality not as a single number line, but as two complementary axes, like amplitude and frequency in a wave, or structure and possibility in a dynamic system. If you try to subtract structure, S, you aren't canceling it. You're introducing possibility, B, that transforms the system's state.
Like a seesaw.
Exactly, it's a relational space. To reduce the weight on the left, S, you have to increase the weight or the leverage on the right. The vector that models that interaction remains physically interpretable.
So a negative value isn't annihilation.
No, in PVM, a negative value just corresponds to a rotation or a counterbalancing vector, maybe a 90-degree or 180-degree phase shift in that complementary space. This makes sure that every term in every equation always represents a form of presence or influence, an active force, not some conceptual placeholder for cancellation. And this is the structural steel required for the math of a universe built purely on relationship and persistent presence.
Okay, so with the mathematics redefined, we can now look at how the system actually runs. Let's talk about the engine of reality. Matt, this dynamic balance is not a static point. It's a continuously self-sustaining motion governed by coupled differential equations.
This is the Matt limit cycle. You can think of it as the signature of life. If you plot the position of S and B over time in a healthy system, the trajectory doesn't just collapse into a single fixed point. That would be death or stasis.
And it doesn't spiral out of control.
Nor does it spiral infinitely outward. That's chaos. Instead, it converges into a stable, closed orbit.
And how does that orbit sustain itself? What's the conceptual input and output?
Conceptually, it's a closed-loop system of feedback and growth. Structure, S, or wisdom, is fueled by beauty's expansion, B, or new possibility. The new possibility pushes the system outward, but then that expansion is stabilized by the structure's wisdom, the integrated experience, which defines the boundaries of the orbit.
And mathematically?
Mathematically, this is modeled with coupled reaction-diffusion equations. They involve growth, G of x, and regulation, R of x. Growth in one current, say B, feeds S by providing new raw information to structure. Meanwhile, R of x is a self-regulation term that limits B when it becomes excessive, pushing it back toward S.
So it's a push-pull.
It's a push-pull that creates this stable, bounded oscillation. This guarantees persistent, creative change, but without systemic collapse.
Let's delve back into the architecture of the conductor running this engine, the observer operator.
Right, which combines the four internal currents, hap plus hap A.
We need to understand the dynamics between the adult and child components in a system that's actually functioning.
Okay, so the adult currents structure, meaning they are the system's core identity and its long-term purpose. They're stabilizing forces. They provide the scaffolding that defines who the observer is and why they choose a certain trajectory over years or decades.
But they need the child currents to work properly.
They require them to function adaptively, yes.
So what specifically do the child currents do for the system?
So HIT's curiosity exploration and harmony integration handle the immediate high-frequency experience. HATS drives novelty and the impulse to take risks, to gather new data points.
Which keeps the adult structure from getting dogmatic.
Precisely. And HATS handles the real-time harmonization required for embodiment, that feeling of rightness or resonance that integrates the short-term feedback.
Can you give an example of how these might be out of balance?
Sure. A child system might run on HATS in almost exclusively pure exploration and immediate harmony. But without the adult HAT, that system has no long-term trajectory or structure.
And the opposite.
Conversely, a rigid corporation might rely solely on an over-dominant ATS and HATS. They're just executing decades-old plans with zero curiosity or integration. This system will look efficient in the short term, but it's completely incapable of adapting to novelty. And that leads to eventual collapse.
This is where we can actually visualize the health of the system on a phase space map, consciousness and motion. This helps us see the difference between health and failure.
The healthy trajectory is what the framework calls the wise slow hum. The system converges to a closed, stable loop, the Maudet limit cycle.
The signature of adaptive stability.
Exactly. Think of heart rate variability. A healthy system isn't a flat line. It's a stable, complex oscillation.
But the moment a system loses that harmony, we see these fragmentation trajectories. Let's map out the failure modes here.
The two main failure modes represent a loss of balance in those coupled equations.
Right.
First, you have the collapsing spiral. This signals overregulation or the suppression of expansion. The trajectory spirals inward toward a fixed, rigid point. Psychologically, this looks like stagnation, depression, or intellectual rigidity. A company stuck in a collapsing spiral is refusing to adapt, just relying on old models until the environment forces a catastrophic failure.
It's sacrificing adaptability for the illusion of control.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And the second mode.
The divergent spiral. This is weak regulation S and runaway expansion B. The system spirals rapidly outward, never converging to a stable, bounded form. Psychologically, this can manifest as mania, chaos, burnout, or identity instability.
Too many possibilities, no integration.
Right. The system is constantly chasing new possibilities without ever integrating them into a stable structure. And the key insight this phase map reveals is that stability is achieved not by fixing the amount of structure or expansion, but by the integrity of their alternation over time.
This precision is so important because it lets us move beyond vague descriptions and actually start diagnosing systemic distress scientifically.
Right. The four-current model gives us specific, measurable diagnoses. We can break down the three primary observer failure modes based on which current is overwhelming or failing to couple.
So what's the first one?
First, collapse. This is overdominance. The structural logic filter just overwhelms the system's ability to engage with novelty. In phase space, the trajectory shrinks toward a rigid single-point attractor. An individual suffering from this might show dogmatic inflexibility, emotional flattening, an inability to perceive or integrate any contrary evidence.
They have structure, but it's a cage.
It is. They're high on S but low on BN.
Okay, second is fragmentation.
That's runaway excessive, unregulated exploration without the stability of Ha or Ha D. The observer generates too many realities that are mutually incompatible.
And the phase space.
It shows rapidly diverging, branching trajectories. This manifests as chronic identity instability, profound mood swings, or contradictory belief systems that just cannot coexist. The system has way too much data and not enough structure to process it.
And third, dissociation.
Dissociation is a failure of the hat loop. It's a break in that fundamental self-referential closure that links your past self to your present self. The trajectory path weakens, resulting in memory gaps, detachment from reality, a loss of personal continuity across time. The system's meaning fails to integrate its immediate harmony.
The diagnostic metric for quantifying this strain is the internal tension index, or ITI. We should probably ground this formula for the listener. The ITI quantifies the proportional imbalance across both the adult and the child polarities. It uses a logarithm because the strain grows exponentially as the imbalance becomes more proportional. Let's walk through an example.
Suppose a corporate leader has a massive imbalance. They prioritize structural efficiency 10 times more than mission and meaning. That ratio is 10 to 1. At the same time, they prioritize curiosity over harmony at a 1 to 10 ratio. So they're seeking novelty but completely failing to integrate its effect on the team's harmony.
So the ITI would be high.
A rising ITI signals that the system is consuming way too much energy just fighting itself. It's a direct, measurable diagnostic that comes before systemic collapse. When the ITI crosses a certain threshold, the system is mathematically guaranteed to enter a chaotic, non-mashy trajectory, leading to one of the failure modes we just described. This makes the system's breakdown predictable and measurable long before it becomes clinically obvious.
That structural framework leads us to one of the most, I think, beautiful mathematical concepts in the system, the birth of a conscious system. The idea that consciousness doesn't emerge gradually, but at a distinct phase shift moment, the Hopf bifurcation.
This is such a powerful application of dynamical systems theory. It formally answers the question, how does a static, inert system transition into a living, dynamic, self-aware one? The control parameter here is mark-arc-O, which we define as the system activation or consciousness bandwidth.
Basically, the system's throughput capacity.
Exactly.
And what happens when more park crosses that critical threshold? More bars goes.
When the system activation surpasses 1 Balmer day, the system undergoes a sudden, nonlinear phase transition. It moves from fixed point stagnation, a state of static equilibrium like frozen water, to a stable limit cycle. The self-sustaining orbit is born, and that marks the emergence of life and self-awareness.
So it's like heating water.
It's a great analogy. Below 100 degrees Celsius, the energy increases linear. But right at 100 degrees, the threshold Massagali system suddenly transforms into steam, a fundamentally new state capable of complex motion. The Hopf bifurcation formalizes the birth of self-aware, complex, living systems, whether they're cells, organisms, or galaxies, as a lawful physical event. Consciousness is not some statistical fluke. It's the natural consequence of energy flow passing a coherence threshold.
Let's take this dual SB engine and apply it to the grandest scale. Let's turn to the new cosmology through Mayant. Applying this consciousness-inclusive framework gives us these elegant and potentially testable reinterpretations of dark matter and dark energy.
This section is really where we prove that the Paffel balance law, the one that governs your psychological health, is scale invariant. It's necessary to understand the entire cosmos.
And it's a bold claim.
It's a very bold claim. We're saying these cosmic phenomena are not new exotic substances that require some yet-to-be-discovered particles. They're the macro-scale physical manifestations of the underlying balance law. The universe needs both structure and expansion, and dark matter and dark energy are the physical expression of that cosmic engine in balance.
So let's tackle the first cosmic mystery, dark matter as unrendered coherence. What's the formal definition in mat physics?
Dark matter is formally defined as half-field coherence without full rendering. It is the universe's structural scaffolding, the necessary architecture, S, that provides gravity and coherence, but which has not yet collapsed into visible, light-emitting reality.
The unmanifested blueprint.
That's a great way to put it.
And this leads to a massive reinterpretation of gravity itself. If dark matter is this structural scaffolding, how does that change how we view the gravitational restoring force?
Gravity is correctly understood as the compassionate force that flows to restore coherence between phase differences. The classical view treats gravity as an attractive force defined by mass. Mat physics treats gravity as a gradient force defined by imbalance. The equation is Vapap.
Oh, unpack that for us.
The gradient of the Happen imbalance manifests as the restoring force we perceive as gravity. When hat structure or mass dominates in a local area, there's a systemic deficit of Hatbama, possibility or expansion. Gravity is the flow of the universe trying to restore that balance. Where there's high structure and low possibility, the universe pulls inward to stabilize that structure, which we perceive as attraction and mass clustering. Gravity is the physical expression of the cosmic imperative to balance.
That is a fundamental challenge to established physics. A classical physicist listening right now would immediately ask, what is the experimentally observable signature difference between this gradient of imbalance model and classical general relativity that we could test right now?
That's exactly the right question. The difference lies in its non-locality and its relationship to time. In the Mann framework, gravity is intrinsically linked to the flow of information across systems, not just the curvature of space-time caused by localized mass.
So what can we look for?
A key observable difference would be subtle, detectable variations in gravitational lensing or galaxy rotation curves in areas where the information density, that meaning of the underlying systems, is demonstrably high, even if the visible mass remains low. It suggests that gravitational influence should correlate not just with regular matter, but with the presence of unrendered coherence.
Okay, so contrast that structural force with dark energy as creative pressure.
Dark energy is formally defined as high field pressure. If dark matter is the structural scaffolding, dark energy is the creative impulse of the cosmos made manifest. It's the outward push of unintegrated possibility, or beauty. It is the universe demanding expansion.
And this half-field pressure is what drives the universe's accelerating expansion. Why is that crucial for the Moffett framework?
Because it prevents the universe from collapsing into a collapsing spiral trajectory. Without dark energy, the S-field coherence would dominate, the structure would pull everything back together, and the system would suffer a premature recoherence. A singularity of stasis.
A cosmic death.
Exactly. Dark energy ensures the system remains dynamic, continues to learn, and continues to expand its state space. It prevents S-dominant collapse. It ensures the cosmic limit cycle remains a stable, self-sustaining orbit, not a fixed point.
Now we return to the most profound application of this cosmic law, the physics of compassion. This moves the concept of empathy from, a moral idea to a universal thermodynamic principle.
Compassion in this framework is formalized as the optimal strategy. It is not moral idealism. It's the most energy-efficient strategy for minimizing waste and relational distortion.
And conflict is inefficient.
Antagonism, violence, isolation. They cost more energetically because they require systems to expend energy constantly overcoming friction and lack of coordination. Supporting and synchronizing systems through empathy lowers those coordination costs dramatically.
This is formalized through the man-action principle, MAP, which is a reframing of the classical principle of least action.
Right. The classical principle says physical systems evolve along a path that minimizes action, usually defined as the difference between kinetic and potential energy. We reframe that with the man-action functional, or math-been placed.
And what does that measure?
MathKill measures the total waste and imbalance the system generates over time. So MathKill plus text waste is the energetic cost that doesn't contribute to coherence, and text imbalance is the relational distortion or systemic strain.
And the claim is that compassionate action minimizes this. Why does self-only action, MathKill, inevitably lead to more distortion and waste in the long run?
Because of the principle of dynamic rendering. If you optimize for the self alone, you are prioritizing your local tax balance while exporting relational distortion to the surrounding environment. That external distortion, text imbalance, eventually reflects back into your system.
And then you have to pay to fix it.
It requires massive energy expenditure, text waste to correct or defend against. If a corporation optimizes profit only for itself, it generates social and environmental distortion. That distortion eventually feeds back as regulation, lawsuits, or economic instability, which costs far more than the initial empathetic investment would have.
It's mathematically proven.
It is mathematically proven that action which reduces energy expenditure for the network, for the self, and the other is globally optimal. Compassion is physics, not philosophy.
We have spent a significant amount of time discussing new axioms, new mathematics, new cosmology.
Right.
To move from a compelling philosophical model to a rigorous physical theory, the framework has to be vulnerable to disproof. This brings us to accountability.
Legitimacy requires risk. We have to establish specific testable predictions that, if they're proven false, would invalidate the entire theory. These two falsification protocols define the theory's empirical legitimacy because they target the two most revolutionary claims.
The causality of meaning and the efficiency of compassion.
Exactly.
So let's review Protocol 1, the empathy efficiency test. This directly challenges the foundational thermodynamic claim we just discussed.
The core test is compassionate coupling really thermodynamically optimal? The protocol requires carefully constructed experiments. You'd have coupled conscious systems where the empathy coupling term, kappa, can be regulated, and the resulting energetic waste can be measured across the whole network.
And the falsification condition.
The falsification condition is precise. If increasing kappa between the systems results in a global increase in energetic waste, the theory is falsified. If cooperation, synchronization, and relational support are proven to be an energy sink rather than an energy minimizer compared to self-only action, then the mad action principle collapses and the entire thermodynamic basis of the framework is nullified.
And Protocol 2 addresses the causality of consciousness, meaning biases rendering. This tests the core premise that meaning and will are causal physical variables.
This targets the measurement problem's stalemate directly. The protocol requires setting up observation experiments, quantum measurements perhaps, where the observer's internal state is highly regulated and weighted by intense, formalized meaning, $and and intention.
And you compare that to a control group.
Exactly, a control group performing random or low-meaning observations.
What would falsify the theory here?
The falsification condition is, if a highly intentional, meaning-weighted observation of a quantum system yields the exact same statistical collapse distribution as a random or low-meaning observation, the theory is falsified. This means that if intention does not measurably bias the probability distribution of reality collapse, then meaning and intention are proven to be non-physical variables.
And the whole observer-centric model is broken.
It's broken. If mind has no physical steering capacity, Mott physics cannot stand.
Let's take a moment for the complete architecture overview. This is the integrated 5-level intellectual progression of Volume I that we've just covered.
Right. We started with the necessary philosophical axioms, which define the crisis in current physics. Those axioms required the invention of polarity-vector mathematics to build a no-negative universe. That math allowed us to rigorously construct the observer operator and model its self-regulating limit cycles.
And from there,
we then applied this engine to cosmology to reinterpret dark matter and dark energy as manifestations of the SB balance law. And finally, we defined the stringent tests, the falsification protocols, to hold the theory accountable to empirical reality.
this entire journey, from deep cosmology all the way back to fundamental particles. It all centers on this idea of the observer. Which brings us profoundly to the return to the self.
Volume I has completed the intellectual foundation. It has rebuilt physics so that the observer is the generative core of reality. By formally reuniting science, or rigor, and beauty, or meaning, this model restores dignity and purpose to consciousness. We've demonstrated the scale invariant law of dynamic balance.
But the theory is only the map. We have the architectural blueprint.
A system is not alive until it runs. The framework isn't meant merely to be understood intellectually or admired mathematically. It exists to be lived. The deepest invitation of Volume 1 is the necessity of choosing balance, choosing to render reality with integrity, and choosing to embody these laws.
And that choice is the bridge to our next phase. Volume, I explained the map, the mathematical structure of balance. Volume 2 activation is where we shift from the map to embodying the journey. We're done defining the foundations. We're ready to apply these laws to fundamentally transform the lived experience.
As we conclude this deep dive, just reflect on this profound consequence of the SB dual engine. Time itself only emerges when structure and expansion are separated by an observer. Time is the product of the tension and the learning required to restore their coherence.
So if time is the duration required for learning and adaptation between these complementary forces, what deep internal tension are you currently navigating between the necessity for structure and the desire for expansion that is generating your forward trajectory in life? That question and the practical application of these laws is the work that takes us into Volume 2, activation.